Good morning, friends. Welcome to another Word of God OBE Journal number 19. A quiet morning here. Not the dawn chorus that I've experienced in other mornings. It's quite quiet. I'm not sure why. There must be birds must be off having a little convention somewhere. It's quite strange to be so quiet. This notion that we exist on many levels simultaneously, which you will come across here, there, and everywhere in people's blogs and people's books, people's interviews. People are exploring this sort of thing, including the dead, the so-called dead, who would instruct us on these matters. It's an interesting challenge to hold that in your consciousness as someone who's, devoting a certain amount of time per day or per week to, contemplation, meditation, projection. Because to us, it feels like we're rooted in this physical plane reality, and that we struggle to project out of it to the next one. The astral plane reality, the various levels of the astral plane reality. And this notion that we exist on many levels simultaneously, perhaps in potential, if not in actuality, is it's quite a mouthful to swallow. And even when you get to the level of embracing it theoretically, it's still quite a challenge. And I've been through that challenge many times myself. And it is something you will be able to absorb eventually, much in the same way as you move to absorb the notion that you exist, versions of you exist throughout history on the physical plane as various incarnations. As I said, you are history. We are history. When you sort of manage through by hook or by crook to move to that level, higher self level, I would call it, where you can even if just briefly glimpse a number of your incarnations prior to this one, and maybe even the ones following, and see a number of unique personalities, characters, all functioning seemingly independently. I would say they're not completely independent. They are influenced by each other. But when you see that, you do have, as I say, see it as opposed to inhabiting it. As you meditate on it more, you will come to inhabit it. And you will lose your identification to some degree with the current personality, who appears to be doing the meditation. And your consciousness will spread to the others, and you will probably feel a group consciousness to some degree. And so whoever you were in 1727 or 914 or to use the Christian calendar, 319 BC or whatever, they're all there functioning interacting, suffering, learning, you know, having the experiences that they are grappling with in order to grow and expand and survive. I mean, they're focused on surviving. Um, as you observe them, you can see, the expansion, the experiential complexity outside of the mere survival routine. Um, so it's similar, that sense that you are history, a number of souls incarnate, and you can grasp the sort of simultaneity of their eternal existence rather than the stepping stones of linear history. To me, it feels like a horizontal thing, incarnation, incarnation, incarnation. And I guess that comes from graphs where you would do the linear progress of history through the centuries. And whereas the notion that we exist on, or exist in potential and we can manifest that potential through the various levels seems to be based on various drawings that people have, teachers have made of, uh, the physical plane, the etheric plane, the various astral planes, mental plane, causal plane, and beyond. And that tends to be drawn out as a series of levels. And I've seen it in many books over the years. And they'll always say, well, this isn't really how it is, but it's the only way we can image it. And that's what I've found too. It's hard to image it in terms of dialogue or conversation any other way. But as you're passing through the planes, when you've sort of trained yourself to some degree to do it consciously, that's not how you experience it. It's just different areas and different landscapes and different behavior patterns and that sort of a thing. And it's do you ever meet yourself? You can. I've done it. I recall one specific, like I say, the various other levels of your being may not choose to look like you do. And you sort of emerge into them and suddenly you're there. But that doesn't mean that before you emerged into them, they weren't there before. And I remember I've engaged in distance healing practice on and off for a number of years. And on one occasion, seeking advice this is quite a few years ago, on a specific case. And finding myself outside this astral plane dwelling cottage in the forest that I seem to have developed between lives and keep it as my place, and as the Monroe people say, Focus 27. And I found myself there and looking for guides or something, and I wound up talking to a mirror image of myself. And that kind of freaked me out. But that mirror image did come up with some pretty good advice in that situation. So, and that was one experience of that. And I guess I had to have it, and in order to sort of get over that little hump. And I mean, there's lots of experiences you'll have where you are sort of getting over what I'm calling a hump, a resistance, a doubt, a limited belief that you've been holding on to and not realizing. And as you progress, you will give up various beliefs that you didn't know you were hanging on to. And it's all about attachment and giving it up. And reaching at some point where there are no attachments. And that can be that can be a long journey. I mean, you can experience it in meditation, in a flash, and then, but to sustain it, that's another story. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things we can briefly attain in meditation, and then find out that they're hard to make, sort of as permanent members of your psyche, or permanent participants. And they come and go, and then you go sort of backward down the ladder a little bit to a more simplified belief system determined form of consciousness that you operate on from day to day. And sometimes for your own benefit, and sometimes for the benefit of those around you. You take a very high form of consciousness to day-to-day life, and it can be hard to implement it in a way that's socially acceptable and within the comfort zone of your neighbors, family members, co-workers, I'm thinking of a piece of advice that the Ascended Master in Alice Bailey's channeled books repeats. And it's something along the lines of, above all, be harmless. Harmless. And it's an interesting message to be repeated. It implies caring for the consciousness of others more than your own as you develop. And as I say, it's an interesting piece of advice, and it's something I wouldn't say that I would challenge, but I wonder about, because there are certain situations where upsetting the apple cart will stimulate people rather than, not terrify them, but just sort of stimulate them to wonder why you did it, and what the purpose behind the apple cart was in the first place. But I just give that out. You'll find it in many, many of the Alice Bailey books. Being harmless. And for me, it's a matter. It's up for debate. Benign debate. I don't wish to take an Ascended Master to task for his philosophy, but I do find there are cases where being a little harmful in small doses will stimulate the souls that you're around and get them to reconsider certain assumptions. An application of this point is coming to me now, and maybe that all that other stuff was just a lead into this experience. Doing, you can call it social work if you like it, a bit amusing really. Going to the lower astrals when you're out of body and trying to, raise their standard, raise their vibration a bit by stimulating their mental bodies and their rock hard assumptions that they've died with. And this is not necessarily the hell realms where people are totally focused on the suffering, what they perceive as the suffering self, and the hard done by scenario, and often lifelong drug addicts and alcoholics and various obsessives will wind up there, being angry at the world basically, and then they die in the lower astral with all kinds of negative, hateful vibes, ruthlessness, jealousy, distrust, and they find themselves sometimes in little communities where everyone else is just as bad, if not worse than they are, but they don't see it in themselves, so that's become the norm for them. Often we're working on a sort of first chakra, fight or flight level, the dog eat dog thing, and the endless distrust. The sort of thing Roger Waters is going around the world singing about right now in his current tour. That song "Dogs" is particularly evocative of that state of mind. all alone and dying of cancer. Anyway, it's a provocative song, and he evokes that state of consciousness rather well. Um, but you can find yourselves amongst those people and talking to them and trying to, raise their vision a little bit. And they will resist it, of course. And they might stand around and listen for a while. And but they've got some rock hard assumptions about what has happened and what's going on, and it's very hard to penetrate it. And unlike, say, my interaction that you may or may not have seen with Christopher Hitchens on two of my spirit contacts, which are on the blog and in books and stuff, you can't. They don't have a developed intellect and ability to argue that materialists, intelligent, penetrating materialists like Hitchens have. You can hook them in a little bit with arguments, and if you can argue well enough, you'll get their interest out. But others who haven't developed their intellect on Earth, you can't grasp them on that level. And what you've got is their poorly educated prejudices based on their life experience. And you might, you'll get people with who are very poor economically throughout their lives, were born into it and stayed into it, and didn't emerge out of that, and sort of lassoed themselves to the social conditions and the assumptions behind those social conditions that they were born into. And have very sort of negative attitudes toward the way society is structured, and with them seeing themselves at the bottom, being exploited as workers, as whatever. And then they get to the lower astral when they're dead, and it's a fairly unpleasant place. And the unpleasantness of where they find themselves living is used as another piece of evidence to show that they're hard done by, and society treats them unfairly and cruelly even. And even the sort of promises of religion, which they probably didn't adhere to when they were physically alive, are quoted at you as further proof of it all being a bunch of lies. And you can speak to them of the upper astral and the beauties of paradise, and they won't believe you. They will think you're some kind of religious nut, and just like the ones they may have seen preaching at them on street corners or whatever on the earth plane. And they'll have all kinds of evidence of examples of religious intolerance and abuse by clergy, and shady real estate deals by Hindu gurus, and this sort of a thing. And all of which will seem very real to them, and not so real to you, because you realize they're not the rule, they're exceptions. And regardless of how various corrupted individuals behave within or without the structures of belief, does not ultimately dictate the level of spirit that you can live on. And you try to convey this to them in a number of ways. And I've done this quite a few times. And you do it when you feel you get the energy to do it, and the intestinal fortitude. And you can liberate a few souls from time to time. And just like going, as I've talked before about going to graveyards around where I live, there's a number of pioneer graveyards, people that came to Canada, Europeans mainly, Christian Europeans, and settled here in the frontier days, which isn't that long ago, 1800s. And there's other parts of Canada where it's earlier, but where I am, it's around 1830. You'll find a lot of graves around 1830, 40, 50. And died with the belief system that you wait for Judgment Day. You sleep in Jesus until Judgment Day. And when you go, I go there and try to provide them a means of escape from hanging around the graveyard, I'm usually distrusted. And they will hang on to their belief system, usually because there's a church elder or a pastor around that will, you point the finger at me and, do the get thee behind me Satan thing. Because to them and their belief system, that's what I look like. I don't look like, a humble Christian that's leading them to the pastures of eternity. I look like a satanic deceiver. So, as I say, it's not that dissimilar to being on the lower astral and talking to basically anyone you can talk to, and little meetings where that are usually organized, like a meeting in a community hall in a village or a small town, organized and advertised by astral plane guides and helpers who visit these communities like social workers and set these things up. And then somebody like me will come by while he's asleep and give a talk, and I will talk about moving to the other planes, places I've been, experiences I've had, and not that dissimilar to the couple that's gone to Mongolia or Thailand and comes to their local church meeting and gives a slideshow and talks about it. The essence is very similar. Now, the person that comes to your local church meeting room and gives the talk is not trying to change your ways or make you more spiritual or, pull you up by the bootstraps. But and I'm kind of trying to do something like that on the lower astral. And I'm sort of trying to, as I go around this particular issue, describe this to you, focusing in on something I did last night, or a few hours ago, and before I did it, I spent some time, quote unquote, time, with the deva that I've described, that hangs over Toronto, the city of Toronto, and the lake around the city, and filters all the various vibrations through her being, and puts them back out again, sort of refreshed and harmonized. And when I'm close to the vibratory presence of this deva, there's no talking going on. I just enjoy the benefits of being close to a spiritual lighthouse of that level, and just in the way that you might observe fairies and elves dancing around and enjoy their vibration and their sense of joy and silliness. Now, landscape devas are not particularly silly, but they do have a majesty and a high sense of mission and accomplishment that is very inspiring. And I just hang out there and absorb whatever I can, which is not 100%. These beings are always doing more than you think they're doing, and you sort of grasp onto the edges of their activity, and enjoyed that. As I say, benefited from it, just sort of in a meditative state, feeling the various vibrations passing through them, and that's all sorts of human vibrations from people sleeping in the city, and their various levels of anxiety and frustration and desire and fulfillment in certain ambitions, whether the personal ambitions of various kinds, and not necessarily lots of people that don't particularly go out of their body, but do send out vibrations. They do sort of rise up, and that sort of a thing, and then the vibrations of the spirits of the air, spirits of the water, because we're right by the water, and what they experience on a moment-to-moment basis, that sort of can be perceived and felt, and the Deva does absorb that too. And when I say absorb, I mean sort of like they go through their being and sort of come out the other side. They don't hang on to them, but they do sort of balance them and merge, balance, harmonize. Those are the words that I find myself thinking of. And I don't perceive particularly the Deva as an image, although other people have. And there are paintings in various theosophical books where the psychic experiencer has verbalized their perception of a Deva, and an artist has attempted to paint it from those descriptions. And I'm thinking of books that from 80 or 100 years ago, and like Jeffrey Hodgson's Kingdom of the Gods, and also there are modern artists, mainly on the internet, who try to paint their perceptions of spiritual beings like devas and angels. And I guess it's almost commonplace at this point if you know the places to go to. And I'm tempted to pause for a moment and see if I can find something. Here's one. That's described, this picture portrays the presiding god of a mountain range which is observed high above one of the peaks of the Hottentots Hollands Mountains in Cape Province, South Africa. As I observed and gave my description to the artist, the downflow of power was so great and so brilliant as almost to conceal the form and aura of the god. The uprush, describing the colours, the uprush of golden-coloured fiery powder above the head was particularly brilliant, bestowing upon the god the appearance of a majestic Deva king wearing a crown of flames. In all cases of Devic direction of natural energies, however prodigious the outpouring of power may be, the god always gives the impression of complete mastery of the forces flowing through it and all about it. The central figure is at least 80 feet tall. Another one from one of the mountain ranges in Natal province. And there's quite a verbal description here too. Not sure if I should go into that in detail. There's a spirit of a tree, nature spirit of a tree. This 16-year-old Warangan tree grows in a garden in Medioan on the island of Java. It was planted by the lady of the house, who became much attached to it and felt it to be a living, conscious being from whom, she assured me, she received a sense of friendliness and trust. When taking tea beneath its welcome shade, I became aware of the presence of this delightful tree, nature spirit, or dryad. I found it to be approaching individualization, or evolution out of the group into individualized consciousness, and to be well aware of the affection of the owner of the tree and responsive to it, which would beneficially affect its development. The nature spirit was approximately 5 feet tall. A lord of the tree ferns. A mountain sylph. A salamander, spirits of fire. A sea nature spirit. Uh, an angel in the Isle of Java presides over an ancient Buddhist monument and shrine called he calls the Angel of Java. A healing angel. Sorry about the light there. So anyway, I don't perceive those sort of things. I feel the vibrations. But Jeffrey Hodgson, Kingdom of the Gods, great book. That doesn't deny their formed existence, because I don't see it, not in any way. But I do tune into the vibrations. I seem to be able to do that. So as using that as an inspiration, I think, when I look back on it now, I proceeded onward to a lower astral level and found myself at some sort of prearranged meeting. As I say, that level of consciousness that I'm latching onto now has its own patterns of behavior and schedules and things that I do when I'm out of body that I'm only getting part of, not the whole thing, but I could tell that it was no accident that I went there and that I'd been there before. And so I'm giving a talk in something that resembles an assembly room at the side of a church. And I think it's set up that way so that people can live in their comfort zone of, uh, this is what it was like and this is what it is like. And it's, the same old shit from these religious people. I've got nothing better to do. Let's go and be cynical about what they're saying. And those are the kind of people that you meet, spirits. Spirits who are incredibly like who they were on Earth. They've hardly changed at all. And a lot of them are not even sure that they're dead. They don't really believe this whole, if I'm dead, why do I look like this? And how do I walk around? And, because on the very lower levels, people are very similar. And the density of vibration is such that, they can't really radiate light or shine or fly or do any of that nifty astral plane stuff that, the average quote unquote dead person can do. So you tell them about that stuff, and again, they don't believe you. And so I go through, I introduce myself and to something slightly beyond stony silence, but not much, and look around at a bunch of, slightly disfigured, mostly sort of grumpy-looking faces, and some of them have hunger issues that they've hung on to, and there's snacks and refreshments available at the side, and they've been provided by these, as I say, astral plane helpers, social workers that come, at great cost of their own sort of not sanity exactly, but harmony of being, to do some work on these levels and try to liberate, one or two souls that might be sort of ready to give up their crustiness and embrace something that they don't really understand, but embrace it as a possibility and try it out. There's often one or two, maybe three or four, but usually not that many. And and for the moment, I'm the focus of that particular effort there. Acting like acting like the people that they're around, but not quite as bad-tempered and cynical. And it's an act, but it's something they put on well, and it happens in various ways on the various communities and levels of the lower astral. And for example, in the areas that have been created, what some people have referred to as the homeless city, that are cities on the lower astral, or at least large-sized towns, where certain neighborhoods are set up to make homeless people feel comfortable when they die of exposure, without actually knowing it. They just freeze to death, and or starvation, or the drugs that they're taking knock out their heart, and they find themselves on that level with a scruffy-looking, decrepit neighborhood, and they're lying on the sidewalk under some cardboard or something, and just like they were before, but they're on the astral plane and they don't know it. And the neighborhood's set up so that just down the way a piece there's a soup kitchen or something that resembles that, and these astral helpers are there, not interfering with their lives, but giving them opportunities. And there's the usual behaviors of people trying to rob each other, and arguments, and nastiness going on. Not continually, just as it would come and go, because a lot of them don't know they're dead, and they're still looking for food, drugs, booze, whatever, something valuable that they think they can pawn. So a newly dead person sort of shows up sleeping on the sidewalk, and they hadn't seen them before, so they'll go over and kick them, or see what's going on, and has the woman got a purse, has the guy got a wallet, yada yada yada, something in their shoes, and so that's sort of going on as well. So it does look like a very ghetto-ish kind of neighborhood. The buildings are all falling apart, and and but it's actually on the astral plane, and these astral helpers will be around and about, trying to assist. And if you think of the number of homeless people that die in our cities every day, you'll understand the necessity of this sort of thing. Um, so there's that, and also the other communities tend to be more like large villages, small towns, um, often in a rural setting, a sort of decrepit rural setting. I'm not quite sure why that is, but again, it's catering to comfort zones and the kind of lives that they lived prior. And there I am chattering away about all my travels, and or some of them anyway, and sort of just it's almost like a travel talk. It really is. And I describe various aspects of the Summerland, and say that I'm the average sort of paradise world where the average dead person lives, no matter what their belief system is. There's is it Catholic heaven? Is it Protestant heaven? Is it humanist? The reluctant humanist heaven, where the humanists who didn't believe in eternal life find themselves there, and I have to find some sort of rationalization for how they got there. And humanists tend to be, intelligent, kind people who just rejected the opiates of religion, and because they're kind-hearted, they wind up in a fairly nice place once they've gotten over their mental restrictions, And uh, so anyway, describe some bits and bobs of the various heavens, and announce that I'm, organizing a guided tour fairly soon. And if anyone would like to sign up, there's a list over on the table over there, and I'll be back in a few days, and we'll do a guided tour. And I found this to be because you're not with necessarily religious people that are waiting for Judgment Day. You're with people who have rejected religion and the promises of religion because of their terrible lifestyles, or oppressive, poverty-stricken lifestyles, and they feel that religion would just be one more thing that's screwing them. The system screws them, and that religion does as well. As, so you're not getting that. So you might get a few that are interested in just a little bit of excitement that leads them out of their humdrum existence on the lower astral, where they live in decrepit little houses and cottages, and there are repetitions of where they used to live before, and have manifesting thought form alcohol and drugs that they had before, and there's a lot of, on that level it's harder to manifest thought form desires, but it can be done. And again, the spirits that are essentially helpers but are pretending to be part of the community, they will operate little stores where there is thought form booze there, because in the long run it helps these people. You feed them their various aspects of their assumptions about what they need and what they have to have, and as they sort of live their rather tawdry lives, you try to give them little bits of inspiration here and there. And as I'm giving this talk, I'm not getting rounds of applause or cheers or anything. I'm getting various questions like, why should we believe you? How do we know you're not just trying to rip us off and extend our misery, and this sort of a thing. And or no response at all, just sit there sort of grumpily having their snack and their drink, and it's free, and I'll have this and then I'll go, that sort of attitude. They think they have to sit quietly and listen in order to get the goodies, you know. And of course, they're sunk fairly low. They don't understand a lot of the things that you and I discussing would take for granted. And the things are thought forms. You know, on higher levels, people are indulging themselves in thought form food and thought form, you know, drinks, refreshing drinks or alcoholic beverages. But they have an understanding, a basic understanding that they are somehow manifested thought forms, and but they're kind of jolly about it and living in the pleasures of things being available without cost, and they still have taste buds and the desire to alter their consciousness with alcohol, and it's pleasurable, but they do have and they continue on, and it's been explained to them, you know, well, you'll have your earthbound habits for a while, and then they'll slowly dissipate, you know, and it is slow, it doesn't happen overnight by any means, but they have a basic understanding, whereas these people don't have that. At least in my experience, they have no notion. They're so sunk in the so-called realities of their earthbound existence that when they transfer through an illness or just age or aging, decrepitness of age, they barely have a notion that they've died, and if they do, they go they in such a low level. They're like, well, shit, look at this, you know, all those promises about heaven, and look where we've ended up. It was all a bunch of lies anyway, and this just proves it, you know. So their own negativity and cynicism and rejection and a consciousness bound completely by self determines their new reality, which just reinforces their prejudices. And the universe will sort of reinforce your prejudice about what's about to happen or about to be. And that's true of this level too, but I can go into that another time. So there I'm giving this talk, and it's just your basic sort of chatter about the Summerland and the Paradise Worlds, trying to be inspiring without sugarcoating everything, because I know their disbelief is stronger than one would expect. It's very strong, and it's a great hump to get over. And I just sort of go through the motions, try to be inspiring, because I've done this before. And or this astral Gordon we're talking about. I don't necessarily look like this Gordon, although I can, but you can manipulate your form depending on the crowd and what you think will work well, And I tried to look like a sort of a cool sort of guy, not a sort of well-dressed, short-haired, conventional preacher sort of. I've come to raise you up by your bootstraps and pull you up by the socks kind of guy. At the end of the meeting, I thank them and I say, don't forget now, sign that. You want to go on the tour when I come back? You sign that form, and we'll be all set to go. And I turned away and stepped down off this little podium. Very humble it is too. It's barely a podium, just a raised wooden, stage of about a foot high. And I mean, it's not quite decrepit, but this building has been designed to sort of not overwhelm them with any kind of grandeur at all, but to reinforce their notions of humble structures and their lives, their previous lives, where nothing was particularly sophisticated. And I talked to a couple of the people that organizer types, and then make my exit. Thank everybody, shake hands, walk out the door, disappear, um, and or sort of walk away from the community, so that if anyone's watching me, they can see me walk away. And then you get out into the fields beyond, and you just disappear. It's easy enough to do. And again, you just sort of decide what's the appropriate action for the consciousnesses that are around you. Anyway, I think that gives a little glimpse into some other astral activities, and probably enough for now. And maybe that little display of deva forms will lead us onward into the next thing. And let's look forward to that. And until then, I wish you all farewell and bon voyage on your own trips.